I'd like to now transition to putting on my organizer hat. You may know that I have worked on campaigns for several decades, during which time I dedicated much of my organizing career to getting out the Native vote, through phone calls, door knocking, and building trust for our party in Indian communities across my state. Considering that this 2020 election is the most important election of our lifetime, and I know that we say that every single year, but this truly is, we must win the White House if we intend to protect our democracy and our environment even into the near future. I decided to be bold and to put all of my experience and heart behind a candidate who I feel has the intelligence, the experience, the energy, enthusiasm, and the heart to win this election for working families, for students, for people of color, for our LGBTQ communities, for teachers and veterans, for Indian country, and everyone who has been sidelined by this administration. Let me share with you about my decision to endorse Elizabeth Warren for president. For the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to get to know Senator Warren personally. We have spoken often about the needs in Indian country, and she has taken action legislatively. She personally helped me get elected to Congress. We've worked together to introduce legislation calling for universal child care in pre-K and for suitable housing for our families. I've seen her up close, conversing with tribal leaders and tribal youth, listening and asking the questions that move deep thought and ideas forward. Elizabeth's just released Truly Bold Tribal Plan is one that will give all tribes the executive attention they need and deserve, and will move forward all the legislation I just talked about and more. But beyond all the great policy plans and intentions, we share perspectives in how we look at the world. We both come from humble beginnings and found success through hard work and perseverance. We both were single moms, and we understand what it means to live paycheck to paycheck, struggling to make ends meet. And as a former state party chair, I know a winning candidate when I see one. One of my favorite things about Senator Warren is her ability to explain complicated plans and concepts into language that all of us can understand. She is genuine and warm, and she makes every moment count in her fight for working families. Some media folks have asked me whether the president's criticisms of her regarding her ancestral background will hamper her ability to convey a clear campaign message. I say that every time they ask about Elizabeth's family, instead of the issues of vital importance to Indian country, they feed the president's racism. Elizabeth knows she will be attacked, but she's here to be an unwavering partner in our struggle, because that is what a leader does. I say the president who worships Andrew Jackson, who coddles white supremacists and defends Vladimir Putin, who cages children and freely admitted to assaulting women, is no match for a woman with a plan. I understand that throughout our history, our people were kidnapped, shipped off, assimilated, and adopted out as infants. Families and communities were separated, and sometimes lifetimes went by without them finding one another again. What I'm saying is, she has found us. I'm asking you to listen to her message. I'm asking you to join me in my mission for the working families champion, the woman who doesn't walk but runs through train stations and airports, the fearless and persistent legislator, the defender of our environment, the friend to teachers and students alike, and beating the current occupant of the White House. She has a plan for that. And I'm proud to support and introduce the amazing, the unstoppable, my sister in the struggle, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Marcella LeBeau and Donna Brandis escorted Elizabeth Warren to the stage.
Can I just say hello? Good to see you. Hello. Good to see you. Hello, sweetheart. Good to see you. So nice to see you. Hello to everyone. Hello. I want to pay my respects. That's an extraordinary introduction, and I feel so cared for by the women who walked me out. Thank you very much. Deb, thank you for the generous introduction. Deb has been such a good partner and such a good friend. And I stand here and I see so many people I've had a chance to work with on issues like preventing suicide and missing and murdered indigenous women and trying to get full funding for health care and for housing. I see young leaders who come and talk to me about the new businesses they're starting on tribal lands, graduates of our tribal colleges who have innovative ideas, tribal leaders who remind me every day how much our tribes serve their citizens and their neighbors. The message I hear from Indian country is one of resilience and hope. Now, before I go any further in this, I want to say this. Like anyone who's being honest with themselves, I know that I have made mistakes. I am sorry for harm I have caused. I have listened and I have learned a lot. And I am grateful for the many conversations that we've had together. It is a great honor to be able to partner with Indian country. And that's what I've tried to do as a senator, and that's what I promise I will do as President of the United States of America. The federal government's history with our tribal nations has been one of broken promises. We need to make change. We need to honor our trust and treaty obligations to the Native tribes. And we're not going to do that with one little statute over here and a couple of changes in regulations over there. It's going to take big structural change. That's how I see this. Think of it this way. Full funding for housing, for health care, for education, for infrastructure. Those are not optional. We need to change the rules and make it happen. Government to government relationship, that is not optional. We need to change the rules and make it happen. And missing and murdered indigenous women, to talk about particularly on this day, this is a crisis, and tribal sovereignty and full funding so that tribes can keep people safe is not an option. We need to change the rules and make it happen. Big structural change. That's what Congresswoman Haaland and I are fighting for. Big structural change so that everyone has a chance to build a strong future. Thank you for having me today. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Is this my place? Where would you like me?
Or you can sit.
No, I'll sit. I'll sit. I don't want my back to people.
Okay.
Here we go. Thank you. Here we go.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to start with a question from Chairman White from the Winnebago Nation.
Well, it's a special day, I feel. I just got a hug from the next president of the United States. Senator, this pertains to law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
So the Senate Indian Affairs Committee has repeatedly documented that our on-reservation law enforcement is and has long been in crisis. Virtually all Western reservations where the criminal jurisdiction is exclusively federal and and tribal operate with less than 60% of the officers that the federal government's own studies show are necessary. We also have detention facilities that are in such bad condition, unreliable heat, water, air conditioning, bad ventilation, and cracking walls and leaky roofs, that they would not be allowed to operate anywhere else in the country. What steps are you prepared to take to address this crisis?
So thank you very much for the question. I see this as having two parts to it. I think there is a sovereignty and respect part to this, and there's also just a plain old money part to it. We have got to be willing to put the resources in so that the tribal nations are able to keep their citizens safe. We just must. What I'd like to see us do is reverse Oliphant. I want to see the tribal nations able to protect all people on their territories, and that means jurisdiction over both tribal citizens and non-tribal citizens. And then we need to be willing to put the money in so the system works. It's not enough just to acknowledge sovereignty. We've got to put resources behind it so that law enforcement has what it needs to be able to get the job done, so that the judicial system has what it needs to be able to operate the courts. So I see this as moving forward on both grounds. It's the importance of our recognizing the sovereignty of the tribal nations and the nation-to-nation relationship between the federal government and the tribal nations, and it's about putting the money in to honor our trust and treaty obligations.
Thank you, Senator Warren. I especially appreciated your platform on what you're going to do. It seems you really have the pulse on Native Americans and the necessary things that we need in order to exercise our sovereignty within our respective nations. I also appreciate the fact that you said that you are going to appoint somebody to come and deal directly with Native Americans, because as a tribal leader, it's extremely frustrating as we navigate every cycle of elections. It's, as Native Americans, you oftentimes have to go in and educate new administrations around the issues that relate to Native Americans and the unique sovereign status that they share and the government-to-government relationship that they do. My question is about criminal justice and policing, and you spoke of it earlier in your recognition of missing and murdered indigenous people, women. And I don't want to sort of belabor over it, but some of the statistics, according to the United States Department of Justice, are that American Indian women are 10 times more likely to be murdered than the national average. And also 4 in 5 American Indian women will experience violence in their lifetimes. And homicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for American Indian girls between the ages of 10 and 24. And as you'd spoken of earlier, the crisis has been long a quiet one. And we, as Indigenous women and children, have become virtually invisible within the landscape of America. So my question is as it relates to those things, as federal authorities, quite honestly, fail to really accurately report those things and work to not only advocate on our behalf and seek justice for those women and those and resources. As the President of the United States, how would you enjoin not only yourself, but your administration and your authority to address the missing and murdered Indigenous women in a crisis in Indian country?
So thank you for the question. This comes on the day that is 2 years to the day, I believe, that Savannah was taken. And when I first got to Congress, the Violence Against Women Act was up for reauthorization. And I was one of the strong supporters of expanding VAWA to include Indigenous women and specific provisions and specific resources for that. As you know, though, that bill has now been allowed to lapse. This is something we got to be pushing back on and make sure that it has adequate and expanded protection over where we got it the last time. The other part, though, that I I very much hear you talking about is the invisibility of the problem. That over and over, I'm struck by women who go missing and it doesn't make a headline for a week, for a month, women who are murdered, Native women, and it never makes a headline. A problem that is not seen is a problem that is not fixed. So I think of this in two ways. One is the importance of the federal government getting serious about collecting data and making those data publicly available. People need to know the scope of this problem. But the other part is to go back to the issue about tribal sovereignty, about Oliphant, why it is that we need the tribal nations on the front lines, adequately resourced so that they can provide the first line of defense. It is powerfully important that people who are of the community, people who know, are right there to provide the safety and the security that our women, our children, our men need. So I think it's both that we go for, and that we start now by raising this issue every day. And I just want to say again, you were kind enough to say thank you to me. I want to say thank you again to Deb Haaland, as her work in this area has been extraordinary. And she has forced our Congress to address issues that they have ignored. Thank you. And thank you for your work in this area. Together, we're going to make change.
Coshada tribe?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to share the stage with colleagues and tribal leaders. It's a huge honor to be with you today, Mrs. Warren.
Oh, thank you.
Satayok Pahos, on behalf of the Coshada tribe of Louisiana, Satayok Pahos, Yamosin Itanak, Yamosin Hichalayaguk, Satayok Pahos, it Yamit Itanaka, Fakilgo Mola, Alal, Kami Mukub, Kosnaluk, Nati Gilgo, Atinasa, Kominati, Kolomukub. Glad to be here that if we don't speak for ourselves as Native people, no one will speak for us. Today, this morning, I'm very proud to be wearing, literally on myself, a quote from a tribal elder from 1973 when the Cushadas achieved its federal re-recognition from the United States government. I'm wearing a quote which says, "The struggle has made us stronger." And that elder is still alive, and he's watching this morning from Elton, Louisiana, and his name is Ernest Sickey. Good morning, Dad. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning, Ernest.
This says it all for all Native people, in my opinion. But as a proud American, I'm proud to say that this quote speaks for all people around this country. How many struggles have we all overcome as Americans? How far have we come as American people and as a country? And Mrs. Warren, we have so much more to go. And it's not very often that we as Native people come across friends and allies of Native people, and sometimes at great expense to candidates and non-Indians. They partner with us at immense political risk to you, perhaps. But here you're sharing the stage. It's a wonderful day, and Native Americans across this country should celebrate a day today that we're sharing the stage with a future president, perhaps.
Thank you so much.
I would expect more excitement from our Native citizens. But, where's your destination? Where are you headed, Mrs. Warren?
To the White House?
Milwaukee is Algonquin for the good land.
Yes.
And you'll be headed there soon, in the near future, for the Democratic National Convention, to have good discussions and good conversations. And we hope that you take our message with you and promote it on the national platform. The very question that I ask as a tribal leader in my own tribe is that who will protect, defend, honor, and enhance the best interests of this country's native citizens? Because you know what? We deserve it, and the United States government is obligated.
Yes.
The Native Americans across this country would like to talk about Reconstruction. Reconstruction. Because as we stand now, $2.5 billion is what the annual budget is for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to be distributed among 573 federally recognized tribes. That is unacceptable.
Yes, it is.
And shameful. And we have let this country's native peoples down. We owe so much to our elders, our predecessors, our current generation, and future generations of the unborn. Harvard University, which you're all familiar with,
I've heard of it.
George C. Marshall spoke at Harvard, and he said at one time during that speech, "Our policy is not directed against any country, but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos." How many Native Americans face that at your reservations? Raise your hand. How many of these things sound familiar to you? Again, it's extremely shameful. In 1948, the United States implemented the Marshall Plan. The plan was in effect until 1951. Over the course of this period, including aid provided prior to the start of the Marshall Plan, the U.S. invested just shy of $1 trillion in current dollar value in economic and technical assistance to European nations post the damage caused during the war. While these efforts addressed post-war recovery, they equally included efforts to modernize European infrastructure. And the efforts served to create an atmosphere of hope that would lead to greater strength and prosperity. Mrs. Warren, you have spoken passionately about the issues of reparations and how it is a moral imperative. However, to date, none of the 2020 candidates have raised the issue of Reconstruction for Indian country. The United States commits billions of dollars to Reconstruction in countries it has waged war upon, the last being Afghanistan and Iraq. In respect to military conflict, the United States was engaged with the Great Sioux Nation for 36 years, twice as long as the current conflict in Afghanistan. That is but one example of many. The economies and vital infrastructure of tribal nations subject to war with the U.S. were either destroyed or devastated. And yet not $1 has been invested in reconstruction of these tribal nations by the U.S. As president, would you commit to a reconstruction program to rebuild Indian country and redress a historical wrong?
So, thank you for the question, and thank you for the way you frame this. You know, I look at this as show me your budget, and I'll tell you your values. Where a country spends its money tells you what that country values. One of the reasons that Deb and I put right at the heart of our plan is full funding for infrastructure, for education, for health on our tribal lands, is that we understand that until the United States honors its already existing trust and treaty obligations, that we cannot have the kind of prosperity among the tribal nations that they deserve. So we start there, and I think what I would like to see, and I hope this is the right way to think about it, and we've stayed very open textured in how we've we've addressed our plan. We've not yet gone to statutory language because we invite much more conversation from our tribal leaders, from the intertribal organizations, from experts and young people who want to come in and tell us about different parts of the language. But here's where I'd like to start. I would like to start with the United States government honoring its current trust and treaty obligations in full and see how far that gets us. If I can, I just want to add one more small point, because it's something else that Deb and I have worked on together, and that is about bigger programs and plans that will reach a lot of people. They're not specific to Indian country, but would have a profound effect. I've proposed a tax, a 2-cent tax, on the greatest fortunes in this country. It's a wealth tax, the top 1/10 of 1%. And with that 2 cents, we can fund childcare for every baby in this country age 0 to 5. That means money straight down into our tribal nations to be able to offer this care for every one of their children, paid for by the federal government. Universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in this country, raising the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in this country. These are the things we do and should be doing together. And I'll just add, because it gives you an idea of how distorted our economy has become, that same 2 cents will not only do all of that for our babies, it will permit us to provide technical school, community college, 4-year college, all of our tribal colleges, tuition-free, expand the Pell Grants for the people who most need them, put $50 billion into our historically black colleges and universities, minority-serving institutions and tribal colleges, and cancel student loan debt for 95% of the folks who've got it. This gives people a lot of educational opportunities and also means for people struggling now with student loan debt, we can cancel that student loan debt, and that's going to make it easier for a lot of people to be able to move back to the reservation, be able to move back to small towns in rural America. You ought to be able to make it wherever you live in America. And part of that is about the United States government honoring its promises. That's where I am on this. I hope that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Next question is Aaron Payment from Sault Marie.
Ani buju biwaka jigandishnakas makwa migizi ndodum bawating ndonchba Anishinaabe Ojibwe Odawa Otawatami and Dao. I serve as the president of the United Tribes of Michigan, vice president for Midwest Alliance of Sovereign Tribes, and first vice president for the National Congress of American Indians, in addition to being chairperson of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. I want to thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank you immediately after you were elected. You've always been a friend to Indian country, and you came to our NCI Executive Winter Session reception, and I've seen you there every year since. So you have supported Indian country not just because you're running for election for president, but you've been around since you've been elected. So I appreciate that.
And thank you for the warm welcome you've always given me. I appreciate it.
And so we had a conversation at that reception, and you told me, I asked you a little bit about your personal history because of the attacks during the campaign by that centerfold guy that you ran against. And I don't remember his name anymore, Scott Brown maybe or something. And you told me your personal story on a very personal level, and I urged you to tell your story, and I appreciate that you did. And what I would say is, from here forward, because now we're in a presidential election, that we take Michelle Obama's advice, and when he goes low, you go high. And when he attacks in a racist way, disparaging one of our heroes, one of our female Indian hero women in our country, that you take the option not to give any credence to his racist arguments, but instead tell us what you're going to do for us. The cabinet position that you've proposed is amazing. That's history in the making. I appreciate that. President Obama got the ball rolling with the annual Tribal Leader Conference. I would ask that you change that to Tribal Leaders Summit. We have not had one since the current president's occupied the White House. So I'm excited about the leadership that you're going to bring to the White House and the government-to-government relationship that I know you will institutionalize for tribes. Natural resources extraction on tribal land, on treaty lands, threaten sacred sites, cultural resources, tribal sovereignty, and the environment. The health of entire tribal communities suffers when outside companies extract precious resources from tribal communities and in turn share none of the profits. Tribes are forced to shoulder the risk of the disaster but share in none of the wealth. Tribal lands are treated as wastelands for industrial mining, uranium mining, fracking, and pipelines. How will your administration ensure tribal governments are consulted and tribal leaders exercise authority over all natural resource extraction in tribal nations?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So let me start by saying tribal governments are the ones who should control what happens on tribal lands. That's what it means, a government-to-government relationship. The second part, I will revoke the permit for the pipelines. Shouldn't have been granted in the first. But the third part is, again, to think about structural change, not just where we make one difference because we must. The pipeline permit should not have been issued in the first place. We can revoke that and straighten it out, but much better not to make mistakes to begin with. So here's what I want to do differently. I want to say on all federal lands, all lands near tribal reservation lands, that it is the tribes who are not just consulted, but who actually have to make an informed decision. And they are decision makers before the federal government goes forward with actions on other federal lands. Good. Good.
Yes, thank you. Senator Warren.
Oh, Elizabeth.
Madam President. What a sound, isn't that?
Oh, thank you.
I am fortunate that Senator Warren is my senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and she's been a staunch champion of Indian country. Her track record speaks for itself. She has either sponsored, co-sponsored, or supported and signed on to so many bills that are advantageous to Indian country, that supports Indian country's sovereignty, that supports our initiatives, and we are very fortunate to have her in our corner as it is, but it would be far more advantageous for Indian country to have her as this next President of the United States. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
With that being said, my issue is more along the lines of sovereignty, and trust, and treaty responsibility, and tribal lands in particular. Tribal lands are the cornerstone of the foundations of our countries, in our Indian country, our communities, our family, and our future. Without tribal lands, we are unable to have housing, it diminishes our culture and our traditions, and it doesn't provide for socioeconomic advancement and self-sufficiency. So what we wanted to do was find out, with the United States trust obligations and treaty responsibilities, as president, how do you plan to fulfill the federal obligation of trust and treaty responsibility and uphold those obligations for Indian country?
So thank you for the question. I think this goes to what we've been talking about all morning, and that is the government-to-government relationship between the federal government and the tribal nations. And that's a true resetting of the relationship. It is there in words, but not in action. The difference is that we need to change the rules to make sure it is there in action as well. I can do part of that from the White House. There is much, oh, I love saying this, that a president can do by herself. And I commit to do that. But there is also much that we have to work with Congress on. And this is why I'm so excited about the work that I'm doing with Congresswoman Haaland, and why it's so important that she's there. Undertaking this issue with each of our colleagues, holding them accountable, forcing them to vote over and over and over on issues that address this basic nation-to-nation relationship. I know in particular, thank you, this is how we work together. The importance of land, and the importance of land as a piece of both autonomy, history, and respect. And so I strongly, we've been in these battles side by side, protect, and as president, will protect the lands that belong to the tribal nations. We're going to do that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Harvey Godwin from Lumbee Tribe.
So I'm Harvey Godwin, chairman of the Lumbee Tribe from North Carolina, and it's southeastern and it's rural.
You got a whistle out there.
Yeah. And we've been through 2 hurricanes in the last 3 years and still recovering from that. But today I'd like to talk to you about something a little bit different. The Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina receives funding through the Native American Housing and Self-Determining Act, known as NAHASDA, under HUD. In 2008, the Housing and Urban Development Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program was initiated, called HUD-VASH. The Lumbee Tribe was awarded 20 HUD-VASH vouchers as a part of our tribal HUD-VASH demonstration program to provide housing to American Indian veterans living in our territory who are homeless or at risk of being homeless. As of today, with the collaboration between the Lumbee Tribe Veterans Affairs Office and the Veterans Administration in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is home to Fort Bragg and the 82nd Airborne, the tribe has housed 20 Lumbee and other Native homeless veterans with a waiting list of 22 more. We are awaiting additional vouchers through HUD. So, Senator Warren, what can you currently do in Congress, or what would you do as the President of the United States of America to fully fund and push through the Congress the needed funds to ensure that not one Native American is without dignified housing as Native American veterans?
So, thank you. Now, this question you raise is one that is very close to me personally. All 3 of my brothers served in the military. My oldest brother was career military. The other 2 served and then came out. One worked construction after. One started a little business. When it didn't work out, started another one. My 3 brothers I'm still very close to. They all live back in Oklahoma now. And I don't think there's a phone conversation or visit that goes by that one or the other of them doesn't raise the issue of how our government treats its veterans. Our veterans, our military, active duty military, have agreed to lay down their lives for us. Their families sacrifice enormously. I can still remember when I was just a little girl and my mother every day would run to the mailbox to see if there was a letter there from Don Reed, one from John, maybe one from David. And on the days when there were no letters from any of the boys, she'd say, well, maybe tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. And on days when there were letters, lit up the family lines, called everybody, read the letter, read it again. She met my daddy at the edge of the front yard, got a letter today from one of the boys. When people sign up for military service and agree to give up so much, that's a sacred promise with the United States government. And that means we have to honor our promises to our veterans, our promises for health care, our promises for education, and our promises for housing. There should be no homeless veterans in this country. None. I also believe that supporting the tribal nations to be able to help with the homeless veteran problem is exactly the right way for the federal government to go. But once again, the problem is it doesn't work if it's all words and no money. You've got to be willing to put real money behind it. I'll keep pushing. I know others in Congress, like Deb, will keep pushing on this. We will keep fighting for this, but I guarantee you this. How we make real change is we get a president who's willing to fight for it, and people across this country who are ready to say it is time for the federal government to do what's right in this nation. Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
And our last question is Amber Torres from Walker River.
Pija Wamawa, mi Amber Torres, mi nania no agarikata poinabi no agaigwe. Good morning, everybody. My name is Amber Torres. I'm the chairman for the Walker River Paiute Tribe in Schurz, Nevada, and I thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the question that I have for you this morning is regarding voting rights.
Yes.
In 2016, Walker River Paiute Tribe and Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe set the standard for equal access to voting rights for our tribal citizens on the reservations in the United States. My question to you will be, if you are elected as the president, how would you ensure that all Native Americans on reservations have the same access without having to litigate?
Okay. Thank you. Let's just start with a statement of our values. Voter suppression is democracy suppression, and it must stop. The idea that one of the major political parties in this country intends to retain power by keeping American citizens from voting is appalling, and we need to be willing to fight back against that in all places where it shows up. It is a special problem, I know, on the tribal reservation lands, and in particular, I support both repealing the suppression acts, but satellite voting to give more people access. I think this is one of the areas, once again, where it's got to be done in concert. Needs are different in different areas, but the key has to be, you've got to be willing to put money behind it. It's not enough simply to say, okay, everybody can do this, but there's no money. So polling places get closed, people can't make it, the distances get further, and the state government that's running it says, gee, we don't have any money to make this happen. So I have, you would be surprised, I got a plan. I'm making sure that every American citizen gets a chance to vote and to get that vote counted. But a big part of it is to set federal standards for access to voting, make sure that those federal standards are appropriate to individual regions and individual locations, and that there's real money to back it up. Voting is the heart of our democracy, and we have got to be willing to protect it as a nation. Thank you.
Please, a round of applause for the panelists and Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I had a question. Vietnam veteran got a question.
I would love to. I would love to.
Talking about
So
veterans,
I'm glad